And so my understanding is that the Israeli population is shifting to be more sort of these ultra-Orthodox, are a larger percent of the population. And so while I would very much like to be solution-oriented, I think that, I imagine that a U.S. that is talking about a two-state solution sounds very tone-deaf and very uninformed to people who are in either Israel or the Arab world. And so how useful is it for us to be talking about a political solution that is highly unlikely or unrealistic? I think it just makes us sound uninformed.
Yeah, it is uninformed. I'm being extremely clear about that, because I would have to actually see what a proposal would look like too before I would want to say that that's a solution. There's probably 1,000 ways of conceiving of a two-state solution, and of course, 999 of those would be counterproductive. So I mean, obviously, I'm not saying this could happen tomorrow, and I'm not pretending that it's that the even if you did have that, there wouldn't be the same kind of animosity. I mean, look what happened when Pakistan and India split off. You got the same kind of and Muslim Hindu violence and hostility and bifurcation, because again they're so similar, but they couldn't live together in that way. But they did come up with a two-state solution to some extent or another. It took a long time, but
a lot of people, and a lot of people died.
Yeah, and a lot of people died in that, right, to make that happen. Yeah.
Your comment earlier about your motivation for your occupation to change minds rather than other versus immediate political solutions. In thinking about that, and then adding what I've heard over the past decade or more, that in spite of the animosity between Israelis and Palestinians, there are people in Israel that have been reported at conferences and places who work very hard to try to reach out to Palestinians and see them as human beings and relate to them in that way. And that's changing minds. I just don't know who they are and where they are. And I wondered if you were aware of groups and people like that.
Oh, there are plenty of them, yes, absolutely. And again, we talk about mixed identities. There are a lot of Arab Israelis, who aren't Jewish. There are a lot of Palestinians who identify as Palestinians but are living in Israel. So again, it's complicated, but people want to define themselves in certain ways. But we talk about Palestine. That is the preferred term to use, but the question is who are the original Palestinians? And the thing is, that is such an uninteresting question to me, because there was always somebody there before them. And so we talk about the Israelites settled in Palestine, but because God said, "I'm giving you that land," right? I gave it to Abraham and said, "This will be yours." Of course, the problem is there were already people living there who didn't get the memo, and so when they moved in, there was war, and that's when the Kingdom of Israel formed, because the tribes were all isolated and vulnerable. So once we get the Kingdom of Israel, now it becomes an institution, and then they go about wiping out all the other people, and it was ethnic genocide. I mean, if you read the Torah, they're telling them, destroy their idols, smash the babies' heads, kill the pregnant women. I mean, it's genocide is what they're trying to do, is wipe out these peoples, and so it's really scary. But the main hopeful point from what you said, I think, is that there are definitely groups that are trying to bring people together. There are camps in the United States that bring Palestinian and Israeli kids to play together and do sports and stuff like that, and be educated in a way that gets them to see beyond their stereotypes. Because here's the thing: it's easy to hate somebody if you don't look them in the eye. But once you look them in the eye, it's a lot harder to hate people. It's like when you're drunk. am I going to admit this?
It's okay.
Well, this may be too autobiographical, but if you're driving in the car and somebody, cuts you off, it's easy to get really angry at the person, and then you look over and you look them in the eye and you go, oh, all right, whatever. But when you can objectify somebody in that way and not see them as a human being, but see them as a, car or something like that, or it's a lot easier to prejudge.
Disappear them, to just kill them,
or just to dehumanize them, just to not even, not to care about what's going on with them at all, because they're just getting in your way. And of course, when somebody's getting in my way like that, it turns out always it's not them that's the problem, it's my impatience that's the problem. So, whatever.
The first thing I said was to disappear them. I mean, in a jail or in a casket, or just
sure.
blow them to smithereens.
And there's ways to do that without even doing that. I mean, just to dismiss them or not include them in the discourse, or, again, it's to me, a lot of it comes down to overgeneralization. Everybody is different. And so to lump people together into these big groups makes it just so easy to stigmatize and to hate, because once we get to know people, it's a lot harder to hate them. Well, we've been at the university a long time. I think there's a few people there that, but it's harder. It's harder to hate somebody once you get to know them, because people are complicated, and and also, of course, I'm also finding, and this is what we were talking about at the beginning, is that when I do have a really negative reaction to somebody, it's almost always because they remind me of myself in some way, and it's all just projection. I don't. That's not me. I can't possibly be me. So I mean, that's the same thing with homophobia and things like that. It's like if you're latently homosexual, you're going to become aggressively anti-homosexual, because you don't want to admit this about your own character. And so it's like, in Hamlet, I think Macbeth, I think the lady doth protest too much. The more you protest, the more strongly that it probably applies.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I think that if I'm a Palestinian and in order to go to my grandparents' house, it's a 10-mile drive and it takes me 4 hours because I have to go through 10 different checkpoints, and each time they're asking me to get out of my car and do stuff. I don't think I'm angry at them because they're like me. I think I'm angry at them because I want to see my grandma 10 miles away. And if they're knocking down my door at 3 in the morning, 2 times a year, looking for someone who doesn't live there, I don't think I'm angry at them because they're like me.
Yeah, no,
so I'm going to push back. I don't.
No, go ahead.
I think you're talking about interpersonal relationships in the context of the United States, and it doesn't translate.
I also want to point out that there's a micro and a macrocosmic level to this, and on the cultural level, I think we're finding that the roots go back to this kind of the sense of trying to distinguish ourselves. But once it gets down to the level of people hurting each other, that's where it really becomes insidious, because then it's actually people hating people, and it's not just people hating an idea. And I agree with you, absolutely. On the microcosmic level, this is not a cultural problem. This is a problem with oppression, as we were talking about.
Which is a political problem, and I think so. I don't want to talk too much, but I think that, I also think I'm going to push back on a short trip to politics. I think politics is actually incredibly important.
Yeah.
And I think politics is not just, is not ultimately force. It's figuring out how to get people who disagree to come to some common understanding. That to me is what politics is. It's not, yes, we see people who are doing it in ways that are clearly self-interested and nasty, but I think a lot of what happens in politics tends to be a lot less visible, and it's people trying to figure out here's someone who I really disagree with, or how do I figure out how to find common ground? Yeah. And I see people doing that all the time, but they're afraid, they don't call it politics because politics has this dirty name. But I think that when people are saying, oh, here's this person, and my job is to get them to do something together, and they really don't like each other, how do I figure out how to do that? I see people at my job and in my life doing that all the time, and that's politics. They don't call it politics because when they say politics, they think Trump or whatever. But that's politics. It's figuring out how to get people to come together.
Yeah, and
So I think when you just label politics in that way,
Right.
I think you're oversimplifying.
I'm definitely oversimplifying, and what I'm missing, and what you're pointing out to me, is that political solutions can be military, but they can also be diplomatic. And it's the diplomacy is what you're talking about.